So, where we're talking about government funders, and we're going to talk about other funding types as well, but particularly, I think we're going to talk about what do you need to do, first off, to be able to access those funds, but more importantly, maintain those funds, right? One of the things that I've always been very proud about is I think everybody we've gotten money from has come back to us later, right? One-off programming doesn't really do you very much good, but building longer lasting relationships absolutely is what gets you sustainable programming. Now, where it gets interesting in library world is I think that there is a perception that many funding sources require things that are occasionally at odds or antithetical to what we believe about what library service should be, right? And this can be things such as, but you have minimum requirements to do the program and we want to be open to everyone. This can be things like you're requiring record keeping and we have concerns about client privacy and client access. You want it to be a little more focused on specific outcomes as opposed to the outcomes that the client has, right? And there is going to always be that push-pull. But I think at the end of the day, providing service to your clients is better than not providing service to your clients. And being able to provide service to your clients with the sort of stability that you can get through working with government funders means overall more people are getting better service. And we can talk about ways to overcome some of those concerns so that we provide the service in a manner that is most consistent with what we believe is the place of public libraries in the common sphere, but also do it in a way that makes us attractive to other funders. So that's really what we're going to kind of work through today, as well as we talk about how to work with that. So I'm just flipping a little bit. One of the things that we're particularly looking at in library world now is that there is somewhat of a crisis of relevancy. And let me clarify, I don't believe that libraries are relevant, and obviously none of you do. But we do know that when we're external facing, that question comes up. And it has sort of forced us to reevaluate how we project what libraries do, because to us, it's always mission consistent that we are equalizing access to information, equalizing access to opportunity, equalizing access to training, right? And whether it was through print media before or access to reference librarians or here, oftentimes digital literacy and education, it's still absolutely on brand for what libraries would do. Because I always say, well, if you're not sure what libraries do, I would say, where do you think, other than libraries, people can just go and say, I need help with something? That's us. And so the more that we can key that into the sorts of things people need help with and can maintain that first stop or that first entry point into lower touch services, the more we can reestablish our relevance in sort of the eyes of the public and the eyes of your municipality, right? Because here's another cool thing that sort of happens. The more we've gotten ourselves engaged with, particularly workforce development at a county and a state level, we've actually been able to use that to get more funding from our municipality, because they said, oh, you guys are doing job training? You guys have all this stuff? They built us an extra computer lab. They've created positions for us. And now Plainfield is not a affluent area, right? But we were able to show value in terms of things that they knew they needed in the community. We were able to show good numbers. We were able to do that. I said, well, we were going to put money into economic development. We were going to put money into digital literacy and training. And it turns out we have a site that's already doing it well. We would be fools to go elsewhere. So there's all kinds of, I think, additional benefits of being able to move to these sorts of things, because one, they're going to be bringing in money for your program, which is going to allow you to offer better, more sustained, more substantial program. But two, as I said, a lot of times there is a bristling at the idea of creation of metrics that are required to report to them. But once you're making those metrics for them, you also have those metrics for the next time you have to argue about your budget to the city, right? So it all kind of builds and builds and builds in making it just such a duh thing to fund your library. Of course you fund your library. Look at all the great, cool stuff they're doing. Anyway, so what are we saying is kind of our key things? People are looking for measurable deliverables with real world impact. And what does that mean? We want to have a statistic that can be easily represented. Something I always like to tell everybody, and this is like the key to grant writing in general. I'm going to tell you the secret to grant writing. I don't have to convince Feed the Children that feeding children is important. They know that. They've put money aside to do that. They've said, we've got whatever, X amount of money. Who's going to feed children the best is what I have to convince them of. I do not have to convince them of the importance of the thing they already put money into as a program. They already know it's important. But I have to be able to tell them why I, or the building, can do it better. And a lot of times I think moving to, I guess it's more of a business way of thinking about it than a public service way of thinking about it can be difficult. Because, you know, listen, we're like, hey, we're libraries. We do great stuff. You should fund your library because you should fund your library. They're great. You remember libraries. But that's not where we sort of live and exist right now. We have to make an argument for return on investment. And you really can't do that unless you're talking to them in numbers. So what are those numbers going to be? What are measurable outcomes, right? So oftentimes funders are going to come to you with a set of what they will consider to be those benchmarks, and you may have to build your model of program around that. And that's okay. They don't tend to shift wildly between funders because at the end of the day, they're pretty consistent within the realm of workforce or adult education, likely because at the end of the day, they all take their lead from the federal. So even if I'm dealing with county, right, and county is oftentimes still bound by federal regulations because that's where the authorization for their funding comes through. So they're going to use the same benchmarks for a workforce program that if I'm applying at a federal level is going to use as well. And generally, what you don't want to do is create a system where I have to change the way that I'm doing things based upon each funder, right? Because then you're rebuilding your system every year. So you want to look at what are the types of services that I want to be offering? What are the funders who this would be under, and what benchmarks and what measurements did they use to tell whether we have effective service in that area, right? So you can take this and apply it elsewhere. Like if I were looking in workforce, right? Okay, how many people have been placed in jobs? How many people got an industry recognized credential? How many people saw a singular grade level equivalency increase leading to enrollment in secondary training? There's a list. We know what they are. Okay, what is an industry recognized credential? What industry recognized credentials can I train them towards that I can test them for that fit with what are the needs within my community? And you're going to be able to work sort of backwards to it. If I'm doing children's stuff, okay, well, what are the metrics they're going to look for there? They're going to want to see, are we seeing a reading level increase? Are we going to see, you know, X amount of programming on STEM, STEAM? Are we going to be, you know, what are we targeting there? It's going to be a thing we want to do anyway, but they're going to tell you how to measure it, right? So for example, we do a lot of digital literacy, and we all know digital literacy is great, right? How do you measure digital literacy? Because I can't just say I want to do classes. They learned how to computer good, nobody cares. But I can say, and we use a variety of metrics for this, we got 100 IC3 certificates last year. It's we got, you know, 200 North Star certificates. Having a measurable allows them to go back to the people who gave them money, because you're almost always a few steps downstream and go, this program, look what this program did, right? So you want to sort of work those things in combination. What are the things my community needs? Who's funding that? And what are their established benchmarks? Okay. So that's pretty much it. Now, if you're going to be doing metrics, you're going to have record keeping for it. And this gets into like a bunch of other stuff. Sarah, can we go to the next one for me? Thanks so much. The other nice thing about getting to a point where you're producing a standardized metric is they're the same across all of them, right? My numbers because I'm working with workforce, are going to be the same language as anybody else who's working with workforce. And that also means if I work together with them, our numbers can talk to each other. So for example, the Labor and Literacy Lab project, we're trying to create a standardized language so that the data can talk to each other. So then when the state library wants to talk about the impact that it's had, they don't have to wedge disparate things together. We can all say, these are the numbers. We had X amount of attendance here, X amount of whatever. When you're designing your system, though, I think one of the most important things to think about, I'm going to hit this a bunch of times, is being overly sufficient in your record keeping and client management. And this is something that I think libraries have kind of tended to bristle at. And I want to walk through why I am still such a firm believer in that. When we first came in here, I actually came from workforce prior to this. I was working at Middlesex County Workforce Development. I was GED instructor in one of their programs, but I was very familiar with how their paperwork went, and I was very familiar with all that. And I said, man, that's a lot of funding. There's a lot of money there. I know what a program needs to do to be considered eligible for this funding. And even though we did not currently have it, I built the program to be able to attach to the highest level of scrutiny of funds, because that way, any funds that I saw out there, we were already rolling in a way that was compliant. And while we may want to do less record keeping, do less client management, because there's sort of a library philosophy of tracking less information about clients, I get that. If you keep moving what you're doing based on chasing funding, your system is going to be terrible. Like, just full stop. Anybody who has experience in data knows we do not want to change the rules to fit the thing. We want a system that works at the highest level. And what's nice is I've never found, because we do everything to be WIOA compliant, Title II WIOA compliant. There's never been a funder in the same sphere who's required us to change what we're doing in a way that it wasn't just, okay, you don't have to give me all that information, but they've never required something that's made us have to change anything. So by staying at the highest level of compliance and highest level of record security, we've maintained our flexibility to attach to multiple funding sources. So we've taken WDP funds, we've taken Workforce Learning Link funds, we've done Title II WIOA funds, we've done sort of individual contracts, as well as being able to do private stuff. So creating a system that allows you to grow in your record keeping is, I think, one of the most important things you can do. And certainly it can be difficult, but I always come back to two things about this. One, you already keep a lot of stuff about your patrons. Every time I don't want to keep information. I've seen a circ system. You don't have much more. We're not asking for much more than you get for somebody to have a library card. What are you talking about? You already got their name, their address, their reading habits, their phone number. You already got all that. So we're not asking for much more than it. Two, because you already have that, I know you know how to keep things confidential. It's in state law, NJSA, what is it, 16, whatever, there's one. It's got to be confidential anyway. If they went anywhere else for these services, they would be giving them that information. Now, I don't want to knock third-party providers, but I feel on a personal level significantly more comfortable giving my personal information to a public library than I do a random vendor who is a for-profit. Okay, they're going to have to give it to somebody. They're better off giving it to you. And finally, nobody. I don't think in all the years we've been doing this, we've ever had a client who really pushed back on it when they're getting a sufficient degree of service. Because the idea to them, they don't think about it in library world. They go, I'm at a government site, applying for a government-funded program. I have to do paperwork. It's like, duh, of course. Every other government building they enter is going to require that you guys get a driver's license, right? You want to literally anything, they're used to that. Okay, they're very comfortable with it. I think you're just going to have to sort of get around that sort of stuff. Anyway, so what is cool is right now we're seeing an absolute change in the way that this type of funding is approached, particularly in library world. There was a really cool change in the 2014 reauthorization of WIOA, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, where they actually specifically called out libraries as being part of the workforce system. We actually have Representative Rush Holt to thank for that, New Jersey. All right, that's really cool. We've seen workforce development at the state level offer repeatedly large programs targeting libraries and their inclusion. There's the CLA CPG, there was Career Connections, which launched in libraries. You know, people are recognizing this. I think that more and more, if you have people who are out of work, if you have people who need retraining, they know that libraries are the first stop. They know that libraries are uniquely positioned for that, and that we can bring people into the system in a way in which people aren't going to wander into one of those third-party providers. They're not going to wander into one of those for-profit training places. They're going to come in and they'd be like, hey, Isabel, I'm looking for a job. They're coming in to us. And so why not hit them? And why not work with, again, other government entity that already knows how to keep records, right? We pretty much automatically pass the test. I like to tell people the ETPL, which is the thing you're going to have to find out about if you are trying. This is the Eligible Training Providers List, which is maintained by the state and is essentially consumer protection. It basically means that I can't like randomly open up, you know, Scott's Shack O Skills and start, you know, billing back to the state, taking clients for stuff. They want to make sure that you're legitimate. And you need to be on it to access certain funds. Now they've changed it up. We got a waiver at the state level a couple of years ago, which basically means now, particularly for libraries and other government entities and some other things, it's much easier to get on the list. But even at the time, we were the only library on the list for a long time. And people were like, oh my God, how did you do that? It was so much work. This is literally how I got us on the list. I called them and I said, can I be on the list? And they said, you're a library? I said, yes. And they said, oh yeah, that's cool. Because they know they can try. I'm not kidding. That's like literally the entire story. We had to do a little bit of paperwork, but it was just like, yeah, you're government, you're a library. People want to work with you. They've been at every level. There is a big push for them to start working with you. You just need to meet them a little bit halfway to make sure that they get the numbers they need to make people happy. That's all we got to do. Why do they want to work with you? Because we have a foothold in every community, right? Most counties, particularly on a workforce level, have a singular or two AJCs, or American Job Centers. Everybody familiar with what an AJC is? It's essentially the unemployment office. They've rebranded it like 8 times because, and this is important, nobody wants to go to the unemployment office, but they think it's about the name. It's not that. Now, why is that relevant to what we're doing? Do you know where they do want to go? The library. This is true. People absolutely would much prefer to come to see us than they would to go to the AJC, which is why a lot of workforce development boards at the county level are looking to incorporate their libraries as a community level service site. People want to go there. Okay. On top of it, geographically, we have that advantage of every community has a public library. Whereas, again, within each county, that's not necessarily a easy trip for everyone to make. Let's not get started on the issue that is New Jersey Transit. And I don't mean the agency, but I just mean getting around New Jersey. You can get from anywhere in New Jersey to New York City, and you can get from New York City to anywhere in New Jersey, but God forbid you cross one of the fingers on a train line.
Yeah, well, there's plenty wrong with the agency too, believe me.
Yeah, but we're recording this.
True.
We love New Jersey Transit. So, but that is a thing that kind of dictates a lot of what people are looking for in service provision in New Jersey, particularly over other states, which is for such a densely populated state, we don't really have as much permeability, right? Where we would be able to regionalize a hub for service better than actually some states that do have good public transit, because by and large, our clients who need the sorts of services we're getting funded for tend to not have as much access to transportation because, cars and car insurance are expensive, right? Gas is expensive. And so if transportation is a major factor, and we're talking about getting them to training or to services that are going to help them have a better economic outlook to be able to better afford these things, this becomes a paradox. So having the sort of extreme locality is a huge, huge selling point for libraries. We are going to be able to reach into communities that you cannot currently reach into. We're equipped to handle the lowest level of learners in a way that I think other service providers aren't. One, I think libraries have always occupied that space. Because we're not a profit-based agency and not that, we've always been open to those things. For example, unfortunately, and I'm not knocking the county colleges, but I think they do a really terrific job. I think they just don't do the job that libraries do, and that we should be significantly more aware of what that handoff looks like. We have a wonderful partnership with Union County College doing that. They're going to have minimum skill levels to take classes at the county college, right? We all know this, right? They're going to get TABed or CASASed or whatever. And, if they want to be sent for an industry in demand job, maybe phlebotomy or medical billing or whatever, they're going to have to show a minimum proficiency in math, maybe 8, maybe 9, I think, for those. That's a lot. Where do they go if they don't have that? Now, they can either sort of get stuck in this like looping hell of taking remedial classes over and over at, some hundreds of dollars a pop, or we say, well, maybe the space of the public libraries is that we address those learners who have even lower level stuff where a more formal system within the county college is not great. So what we do is we handle those learners here, and we have a great connection to Union County College. They come in all the time to talk to our clients about the sort of programs they have where they can get tuition stuff. It's a beautiful, beautiful system. So we're equipped to handle lowest level of learners. We have that sort of degree of flexibility. I think we tend to work in smaller groups for it. That's where we, I think, shine actually compared to maybe a more formal school setting. We enjoy a high level of public trust. That goes back to people like going to the library. People trust the library. Every time they do the most trusted professions, librarians are up there. And why not? You guys kick ass. So we have all these things that make us really attractive. And I think the most attractive thing is if I'm funding a 501c3 that's also competing for funds, or if I'm funding a for-profit training center, they have overhead, right? They have overhead. The library doesn't. Our budget is pretty much taken care of. The walls are already built. The lights are on. We probably already have technology here. But every dollar that comes to us through one of these programs, or darn close to, is going to go directly to service. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been so very successful at providing this, is that we're able to, in some ways, I guess I would say, do it cheaper because we don't have to cover those outside costs. It is almost, in a sense, additional programming added wholesale as just programming, instead of worrying about keeping a home office going. If you're funding a two-man 501c3, right, they're 100K in before they're providing $1 of service. We don't have that. So to me, that's always been one of the most persuasive pitches, as well as just, us. We're the library. Us. And that was both for clients and funders. Can we hit the next one? So first steps, I think, if you're going to start doing this, is you need to start being recognized as part of the essentially social service system within your area, right? Because that's how all these things are going to attach. You really don't want to be working in a vacuum for a couple of reasons. One, in terms of sort of directly approaching contracts, they don't know who you are. Two, I've never found any initial approach for funding that I could be effective at if I could not describe the current situation on the ground, right? They don't want to see duplication of services. They want you to have an understanding of need. They want you to have an understanding of what position you would be serving in that system. So a great example where I talk about where I talked about how we exist somewhat between Union County College, where we exist sort of in a space right before County College. And it's led to, again, wonderful, wonderful working relationship. So you have to be at those meetings. And a great place to start is your Workforce Development Board. I'm going to assume everyone's fairly familiar. Every county has to have one. They handle a lot of communication between the business area as far as what the business needs are to sort of meet with the training needs. They issue a lot of contracts regarding that for job search, job placement, job training. They're going to be overseeing the AJCs, or sorry, it's AJCs now. Get involved with them. Absolutely get involved with them. You're going to meet all the people that you would partner with through there. You're going to figure out where you can take part in that. Even if you're not directly getting funding from them now, by becoming part of that system, hey, maybe they need a site to do a job fair. Well, A, that's great for your clients, right? We're doing a job fair here. You want to do that anyway. But B, now they also like, hey, we were just at your building. You guys have a great building. Is there other programming you can do? Right? That's just how you start building those relationships. Monthly meetings are listed, open to the public, very easy to get involved or invited there. I will just say as like a standing, Jen Nelson and I did this. We presented to all of the heads of all of the workforce development boards in the state to talk to them about becoming more involved in their with their libraries. They were incredibly receptive about it. We know almost all of them. So if you need help with an introduction, reach out to us. We'd love to get you guys involved in that way. Andrea Lewandowski, also at State Library, I think specifically is the workforce coordinator for that. So you can reach out to her as well and just say, hey, we're looking to get involved in that. If you're a little awkward about the first meeting, which I understand. And then, you start going to them and then everybody knows you can't just sit in the back and drink coffee, which is a pity. But, we were always saying part of the shame of COVID for us was the 5 minutes before that meeting and the 5 minutes after that meeting is when we got more funds for our program or worked out more partnerships for our program than anywhere else, because we were really able to kind of coordinate with people. Oh, this is what you guys need. Great. That's where you built those relationships. So I would get there first thing. Can we get to the next slide? Why work with government partners? So going to be honest here, there are other types of funders, and we'll get to this a little bit later. I prefer government funders. For a lot of reasons. One, you know what you're getting. You know what you're getting. Generally, the government funds, first off, you're going to know, is this a program that's going to have multiple years? Is this a one-off? Like, for example, a lot of ARPA-based programming, there was a lot of money, but there wasn't a lot of sustainability. So you had to kind of go, okay, I'm going to be able to do this, but can I link up an additional thing? Whereas like the CLA CPG, which is the Community Library Adult Literacy Partnership Grant through Department of Labor, we knew that that's, it said it's got a 2-year, it's got a 3-year. So you know what you're getting, you know what they want, right? You are someone in the business of customer service when you're dealing with your funders, and they're very clear about what they want and what you need to do to show them that you did it. It's more of a contract than a grant, to be honest. And contracts are wonderful. Contracts are wonderful. And I'm not just saying this because of the attorney thing. One of my law school professors always used to say, I always get contracts with people because I like them. And today me likes them. And today me wants to protect them in case tomorrow me turns out to be a real jerk. Right? It protects everyone and makes sure everybody's clear on what's going on. I never have problems operating in that space because I know these are my deliverables. This is what I can do with the money. This is what I can't do with the money. This is allowable. This is, who I would talk to about sustainability. You kind of have a lot more information. The thing that I find best about the government stuff is there are no surprises. And a lot of that has to do with government transparency laws, frankly. So a lot of times the things that we look at and go, oh, this is really ineffective or inefficient. And those are almost always the outcome of laws that are in place to make sure that everything is as transparent as possible. And that's kind of a push-pull. But I always prefer doing that. It tends to be significantly more zephyrous and capricious working with the private ones. We'll get into it a little bit more later, but yeah. So some of the things that I think what we have is these are some other advantages of working with government partners. Sorry, I read the slide wrong. Why we want to work with partners more. And these are really, really important. Not only are they going to result in better service, but they're going to position you in a way in which you're going to be able to attach for more funding. So first off, avoid the one-room schoolhouse. Oh my God, I think occasionally we get more concerned with providing service than we get concerned with providing good service. And a service that serves everyone is not good service, because there is just no way to give people what they need at any sort of individualized level if you're trying to serve everybody in the room. Now, anybody here who's ever taught one of those like one-off computer classes and you get somebody in there who's like, I don't know what a mouse is. Another person's like, are we going to be doing macros in Word? Nobody is getting anything out of that class other than frustration. But if you're going it alone in your area, you feel like you need to serve everyone. And so you end up serving no one well. So when you have partners like what I described at UCC, you can have more targeted service and then know where to give people for each individual thing. Something that I'm occasionally more negative about than people are comfortable with me expressing is the way that 501c3s and other vendors operate in this space, because, and I don't think there are any bad guys. Nobody gets into the public service game, be it through government or through a nonprofit, because they're looking to rake in the money. But because their survival depends on their ability to distinguish their program and the individual service that it does, they don't tend to play well with others to a particular point, right? Because like if I'm a 501c3, I'm never going to be able to fully engage with you as a partner because I need to hold back stuff that I can be like, but this is my stuff that when I go out and try to fundraise on, or when I go out and try to get funding on, I need to say, this is what I do. And the sort of sublimation of their identity as a distinct provider, they occasionally, I think, conflate with a death knell. And it makes them difficult to work with from time to time. Not that they're bad people. Nobody gets into this game to build a swimming pool in their backyard. But with the government partners, it's much easier for people to actually find themselves in an established role because they don't have the same, sort of Damocles overhead where they're like, but my God, if I don't hit our whatever, the whole building closes. They don't have that. So they're much more willing to work with you to create a functional system without having the degree of territoriality that can become disruptive. Economy of scales, right? If everybody's familiar with that one's pretty self-explanatory. If you can work together with people from the simplest things, like getting a price break on, the amount of books you're ordering, or getting being able to share use of anything. There's a lot of efficiencies that can go on when you're working within those systems. Eliminate redundancies. This is, I think, goes hand in hand with the one-room schoolhouse thing, but we've talked about if everybody's doing their own thing, where are you going? Like most of you, if you have any sort of finger on the pulse of your community, how many programs are actually running? And you don't even know all the programs that are running. And if everybody's just doing their own thing, you have no idea where to send people. You have no idea who's the best referral to make. Nobody is working together to sort of create the type of structure that's required for good service. So knowing, oh, okay, Tom, you've got this. Okay, I've got this, means that we can actually create a good system. You're going to be able to connect disparate yet related services. I think everybody here who's worked any of this for social service adjacent things, if they're coming to you for one thing, it is very likely that they are going to another agency in town for something else. And the more you can coordinate that, the easier you make your client's life. Whether that's just as basic as a seamless handoff. The amount of people who do not get the services that they are entitled to because they got a bad handoff is shocking, where they go, oh, okay, I think if you go over to, this agency, they can talk to you about rental assistance. I'm not sure what you need to bring. And then they go and they're like, oh, you need these forms. You got to come back next week. And it just kind of builds and builds and builds. But if you have these relationships within your government partners, you can go, hey, you need rental assistance. We call Rashara over at Plainfield Action Services. Hey, Rashara, I have Tom here. He needs some help with that. Can we make an appointment for him? Sure. This is what he has. Is that all that he needs? Oh, okay. Hey, Tom, do you have a document that has X? He's going to go in. He's going to get the services he needs. Not only is he going to get the service there, but his situation will be more stable for that. It'll actually be able to do better in your programs as well, because the cause becomes the effect becomes the cause. Always in adult services, particularly, one disruption or one instability leads to a difficulty in stabilizing other aspects as well. So you're going to be able to have such better handoffs, such better wraparound services. It's kind of the dream. And ultimately, your services are not helping anybody if no one knows they're there. If a library is providing services in a forest and no one's around to hear it, are they providing services? So there's a lot of reasons why we want to look at those government partnerships. It's just significantly easier to become part of the system, and there's a lot of advantages that come from being part of a system. And then, frankly, when there is money available, people go, who's part of our team? Those guys. We want to make sure we keep that going. Anyway, can we go to the next slide? So grant considerations. Here's some things if we get to that point, the stuff that you want to look for. And to me, this is, again, one of the reasons, almost every single one of these reasons is why I prefer government funders. Formal versus informal agreements and partnerships. You know what an informal agreement is? Nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. Doesn't mean anything. It is absolutely useless. I always talk about puppy dog and lollipop meetings, where you guys all been to those meetings. Someone's like, I like puppy dogs and lollipops. Me too. I also like them. And it's like just agreeing to a general good thing, but like no details. What's everybody doing? We all got together and talked about how much we liked a thing that we all know is good. Or like, we should all do something about this problem. Yes, we will work together to do something about this problem. What does that mean? What are you going to do? We're going to do things. Awful. All right. So we really want to avoid that. It comes back to, again, the thing I said about contracts. They protect everybody. They make things clear. This is what we're doing. This is what they're doing. These are the expectations. You got to have that stuff clearly outlined. Otherwise, it's not a plan. I don't think you have to be aggressive with people about this, but I do think that you kind of have to go, hey, this is great. You know what? Let me write up some of this. Let's reduce it to writing so that we all are clear on what it is and start to move them that way. You have to figure out what resources, funding, and information can be shared. And this is huge, by the way, right? Because we have all the sort of information sharing stuff. So for example, we work with the AJC like all the time. They're pretty much coworkers at this point. Lovely people. Depending on how a client came into the program and what paperwork they've done and whether we're functioning as a partner or an affiliate or, where they came from, depends on what information they can share with us about those clients and what information we can share with them. And we have to do a lot to make sure that we have waivers where necessary on that. Whereas there's another degree where you can become an official affiliate, in which case the confidentiality stuff is already kind of included. You have to know, if I'm working with people, what do I need to have clearance for information that I can not trade, but share as far as status on stuff? Or like the example I gave you guys with making just that referral with Tom with a partner. What is the process we have that? What is the process for clearing the sharing of client information? Funding, that's a big one. Can I subcontract? Can they subcontract? If I purchase something for this program, can I have other people use it? Must it remain in control of this building? Can funds from this be braided or mixed with other funds? You got to absolutely be clear about that. Even silly stuff. We have a training going on. Okay, we have a building-wide training going on. And some of our employees who are being paid under some grants, the grant will not allow us to pay their hours for a building-wide training because it's not directly related to what their grant purpose was. And then other grant employees, they're like, yeah, of course you would. Some of our grant employees during their funding get paid for holiday time and others don't. And again, it all comes back to the rules governing the funds you have. You absolutely need to be clear about that. And, you know, sometimes you may have to push for that detail. But again, I'm going to use another, like one of my fun law school stories, but they always used to say, you don't want as a client, someone who doesn't want to have that conversation with you, right? Someone who doesn't want to hear you say no to them, you don't want as a client. And there are things that you're going to have to do to make sure this runs well. That maybe you're going to have a short term, this isn't as good as if we could do it the other way, but is it an eye towards a long term that we want to make sure that we're doing everything correct? And if they're not going to work with you on that, don't work with them. You walk away. No short-term gain is worth working with somebody who's not going to be as 100% on board with doing everything as it needs to be done. And you know, so somebody who won't let you lock them to specifics, walk away. Well, you know, when you guys figure out specifically what you need, I know it can be complicated. Come back to us. We would love to work with you then, you know, once we know what your needs are. But, and I know, and I've heard so many times where people have taken money because it was in front of them and it's tough. It's tough. Don't do it. Don't do it. If you don't do it, it never ends well. Can programs be incorporated vertically or horizontally? This is also really important. So we would talk about this like with a business incorporation model. If you have a vertical incorporation, that means that all steps of a program are controlled by one thing. So, oh, we do a pre-GED, we do a GED, and then we have, you know, a training certificate thing. All the steps of it are under one agency. But if we were to go horizontally, we'd say everybody who needs GED comes to us. And then everybody who goes from us to whatever the county college. And once you hit a certain level, again, each program is going to have the rules of their individual funding streams, unless it's like wholly under a thing that you need to find out if they can play together. Is this a dual enrollment situation? How do we separate out those numbers? Like, for example, what you don't want to do is double count ever. That's like pretty much the worst thing you can do. And so if I have funding coming in to provide a service and other funding coming in that reasonably could also be providing that service, I cannot report the same outcome to both because then I'm collecting twice for the same outcome. And that can really be a little problematic when we're getting a little more complicated with stuff. So for example, we have county workforce development funds, and we have state Department of Labor funds that pretty reasonably can mostly be used to cover the same sort of stuff. Like there's a couple of distinctions, but what we have to have is a hard separation between, well, this class and this instructor is paid out of county funds. So the outcomes from that class go to county. This class is paid out of state funds. So the outcomes from that go to the state. And where it can get complicated is there are things we can't do under our county class. So for example, all of our county clients have to be what's called certified. They have to pass a WIOA certification. And if they can't do that, we have to put them in the state class, but we can't split a class and go, well, this client is here from state, this client is here from county, because that would involve prorating, and that's just not a thing we're allowed to do. So unfortunately, we have to literally have a hard separation. And even if then we have to make sure when we report our numbers out to the AJC, that definitely gets our county numbers, but they also like our state numbers because these are people who are in the workforce system in our area. We have to go, but you don't get to count these. They were paid under state WDP funds or state, you know, whatever. making sure that you keep those things separate is, I think, maybe the most difficult thing of when you start getting into multiple funding streams, whether they're multiple funding streams in-house to you, or if I'm partnering with another program and they have a distinct other funding stream, to make sure that they're not reporting to their people a number that was gained under my funding and vice versa, where that number would then be double counted. Very, very, very bad. That is pretty much the mortal sin, is to double count or to double dip. Like, I just cannot do that. Conflicting regulations, again, we've talked about that. Is kind of what I was just talking about here. I may have some people who can receive services under one thing or not under the other. It can be a little difficult. For the most part, though, you're not going to see like opposites. You're going to see more stuff is required for one. And so you may have to use that as the cut, but not like, oh, well, this could be done this way or this way. It tends to be the sufficiency of your process, right? And that sort of then goes back to why I like to run everything as if it's all being reported for Title II, because that's the highest standard of care for record keeping and retentions, the highest standard of care for metrics production, and I can always scale down, right? But jumping around is never a thing we want to do. So we want to isolate the couple of really like hard point distinctions we may have, understand what they are, and make sure that we don't, in following one, violate another. That just stinks. And then finally, be okay with digging deeper. Be the gatekeeper. You want as much in place before you agree to do business as possible. And that is not just protecting you, that protects them. Oftentimes we said, hey, this is the thing we wanted to do. I can't tell if that would be okay with what you guys are proposing. And either they'll say, oh, that's a cool idea. Yeah, we would be able to fund that. Or they say, no, that won't work under it. I'll give you a great example. We wanted to add North Star certificates under our latest Department of Labor grant last year, because we thought this was a great, cool new product. It was really targeting a space that we think is very library specific. As I said, just like where we would talk about pre-GED being very library specific, or even GED, as opposed to the more advanced being accounting college. North Star is like, I don't know how to use a mouse. And those are the people that come to us for help. And North Star presented an opportunity to have metrics for that level of digital literacy. So this is great. This is on point for everybody. But it was not technically an industry recognized credential. And frankly, it's not as sufficient as some of the stuff we were doing, but it was needed and it provided a number. And so we were able to go back to them and say, hey guys, we really like this. I know that this is going on. We think this is going to produce good numbers. I put together like about 10 pages of documentation on it, and then they were able to approve it. But we took control of that because we were able to, from being on the ground, know what we needed and communicate that clearly. And at the end of the day, the most important thing I think with dealing with any of your funding partners is how clearly and regularly are you communicating with them? Like, they're going to much rather hear a problem from you before they hear it from somebody else. And they're going to much rather, you ask permission before you do. And so dig deeper. If you're like, hey, I want to make sure I do this job for you correctly, they're going to respect that. And if they don't like that, if they are discouraging you from communicating with them about that, again, maybe that's somebody you don't want to work with. That's not a good long-term relationship. Because that's what we want to build to, is stability of service. All right. Ooh, we're running long. All right, I'm going to jump through these next ones as fast as possible.
And before we move on, does anybody have any questions or need further clarification on anything we've talked about thus far? If not, we'll move on to the next slide.
So we kind of talked about this a lot, so I'm going to do it quickly, but you want to make sure you have clear targets, right? We would maybe call these deliverables, is, really the term I like to think about. What do I need to do to show that we succeeded? And then build the plan around that. I told you guys earlier, we're not arguing that what we do is important. We're arguing that we do it better than everybody else. What's the return on investment? I can't do that without targets. Control of the funding. How am I getting funded, by the way? Is this a cost reimbursement? Is this a quarterly? Most of us are not sitting on giant war chests where we can afford to necessarily absorb $100,000, $200,000 and get that back. You want to make sure that you're very clear on how you get paid and what you need to do to get paid. And that's not just for you, that's for them as well. Every single thing I'm saying that protects you also protects them. I can't tell you how many times we've had one of our funders say, hey, listen, we have to have our books closed by X. Can you make sure that the billing is correct? They're not happy that you don't bill them. They're not happy if they don't pay. They, particularly government funders, need to spend that money, and they need to spend it in the way in which it was allocated. So you need to make sure you're doing all of that correctly. How do I bill you? How do I get paid? How do you prefer this documentation to be done? Reporting, again, that's related to your targets. Let's make sure we have that. Let's make sure we're keeping it correctly. Let's make sure that we're compliant and confidential. Sustainability, again, we talked about that. Is this a funding source that is worth pursuing? Because if somebody gave me a $500,000, but it's a one-time, yes, I'm probably turning it down. At this point in time, I'm probably turning it down, unless they would let me do something like just invest it and like take the interest off of it. Because like $500,000 as a pure service expansion is not going to be something I can sustain. So what I'm going to run for a year to maybe get 6 months of like solid service at the end to see it all just like no, that's not worth it. Because remember, with a service expansion, you're also probably hiring people. If I need 3 months minimum to hire from the time I've been cleared to spend money, and I'm hiring in a non-sustained fashion, I'm hiring under a grant, who am I getting for these part-time positions? And who's going to take a part-time position like, yeah, you want to work here for 6 months? That's not good. So you really, sustainability, $5 of sustainable funding is worth $100 of unsustainable funding, without a doubt. And then compliance, what do I need to do to make sure that we don't get in trouble? And for them, what do I need to do to make sure you don't get in trouble? I have had to sit in on a federal audit. We didn't do anything. We were just there because we had received money above a certain amount. And so we were just there. And even not being accused of anything, it was probably the most uncomfortable meeting I have ever sat through. It is tough. They are, so, making sure like, what do I need to keep you out of trouble? They will love you for that. You don't cause problems for it. You're their favorite partner. So broadly, let's just look at sort of the different places you can look for money. Federal, one of the things I'll say about federal agency funding is they very rarely want to be funding something where the impact is as small as we're looking, right? So we were able to get federal funding, for example, for the Labor and Literacy Lab or the Hub and Spoke thing, because that was projected to have a statewide impact, right? Even though we were modeling it from here, but it was a statewide thing. Other than that, feds are probably going to be giving money more directly to a state level agency that then may be redistributing funds through, which is actually what happened with the IMLS one. So it's good to be up on what the federal funding bodies are doing, because that'll tell you where the state's going to be going with distribution stuff. So for example, there's a lot of the federal broadband stuff, right, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, which, there's going to be a lot of the digital equity and inclusion that this is going to trickle to library world. No doubt, libraries have been involved in it from the top. We've seen a presence of these people at Library World events. But are you going to be getting direct money from the Federal Broadband Initiative? Probably not. It's probably going to end up coming either through money that gets distributed down to the county that you work through as part of that, as an outpost for it, or money that's going to come through state library and smaller issued grants. But it's always good to know what's up with that. When we look at the state stuff, generally with the things that the public library does, we work with state library. Of course, all of you are familiar with that. Department of Labor has been hugely involved in library world as of late. As I said, there's the CLAPG grant, which is really fantastic. And they've had a whole bunch of initiatives specifically talking about getting the libraries connected with the AJCs. So you want to think about that. But again, Department of Labor, the caveat I do have is their money will almost always require a real higher degree of compliance and a real high degree of sufficiency of service. Now, that works for us. We've dealt with them for a very long time. I find them to be phenomenal partners, but it may not be a good first step partnership as you're building things up. Department of Education, of course, has smaller things for that as well. Ed is a little weird as far as direct grant stuff. You're not really going to be getting that from them, but when we're dealing with sort of other distributions, it's a place to look. Local, this is where it's at. Because even if you're not directly getting the funds from that locality, showing your connection to these local things is such a great way to then access county level funding or state level funding. So if you're not meeting regularly with your county one stop and AJC, you should do that. Okay, because all social service agencies are also going to flow through the Workforce Development Board as well, because we know that all of these issues are interrelated. Health and Human Services, everything comes under that. And even under Workforce Development Board, remember, they also target ISY, OSY, in-school youth, out-of-school youth. So that's covering kids from basically 16, really 14 and up are all going to be under that as well. So you're going to have a school district partnership. Everybody really does come together who's doing social service of some degree in your county at that point. And of course, work with your municipality. I know that sometimes libraries particularly have a interesting relationship with their municipality because of our separate but not separate. But I'm telling you, when you show them that you can do the services they want anyway, and they can do it under a government entity, we've had phenomenal luck with that. As I said, we actually have seen our department expanded. We've seen additional labs built. Like they really respect that. We have a great relationship with them because we've been able to answer to part of what the city's workforce development plan has been, what their digital literacy plan has been. We're working with them on it. And so you really want to do that. You want to be as visible as possible. So they don't need to be reminded when the budget comes up by you getting angry library patrons to come out and protest. And we've been in that position too. I know you all had to do that, where you had to get your patrons out to like make sure you don't get a cut. Imagine being in a position where they say, but you know that thing they're doing, that's really cool, and it's cheaper than doing it elsewhere. Let's just fund that instead. And it can happen. There is significant money out there at all levels for the sort of services that frankly are what libraries are moving to do anyway. There's significant funding out there for digital literacy. There's significant money out there for workforce training. There's significant money out there for adult basic ed towards all secondary training. And it's certainly something that most municipalities are concerned with as well. So as we start moving towards it, it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg, but I cannot tell you enough how much you should be in involving them in doing that stuff. We go to the next. Other potential funding sources. So large companies, I have to be honest, stink for this. Because once they're large enough, again, it's like working with the state level stuff. They don't want to fund an individual library unless you have a very specific connection to them. Like, this is the city that Coca-Cola is from. Yeah, Coke will buy you a library, but otherwise it ain't happening. So that's, your like $5,000 Walmart grants and Target grants. And I want to knock them. They're doing, they do what they do for halo effect. I will tell you, we had a meeting with a very large company who will remain nameless, the head of their Northeast giving arm. And he straight up was like, we don't really care about the outcomes, because to them, the way they do it is they sprinkle $5,000 to anybody who asks for it. They get their nice halo effect, and that's it. You're not going to get a program out of them. Okay. Even I'll say Verizon specifically had said that they were not going to do giving above a particular level unless it was at least countywide reach. Now, does that mean you can't go for it? Sure, but I find generally it's not really a great place to start unless you have a direct relationship with them. Corporations with NJ specific ties are going to beat corporations that don't have New Jersey specific ties, just like corporations with specific ties to your community will, of course, beat that as well. But, be clear what you're looking for. If I want just a computer, I'm just going to write a Walmart grant. They have them up on their website and you'll get it, or Dollar General, which I was on their grant review committee a couple of times. they're great for small stuff, but they're not programming. And you have to really think about sustainability and position level programming as opposed to technology. Like, it's really easy to get a computer. It's really hard to get a sustained position, which is, I think, what you get slightly better with government programs and government grants, because they do tend to roll from year to year. Local businesses, again, even if they're the biggest library supporter in the world, you're not going to ask a coffee shop down the street to float you a position. That's not going to happen. Local 501c3 organizations with similar related goals, approach with caution. Okay. I think that there is certainly value to what established organizations can do, but do remember, if they're in your house, the public will view them as you. And if you do not know who they are, if they start not showing up, the public does not make that distinction. And also, they are going to be using the fact that you are eligible for funds that they are not to be able to attach to you to attach to those funds. And listen, if on a certain level they're providing service that you are not able to provide, great, but make sure you know what they're doing and what they're putting your name on, and you have enough control of it because it's in your building. It's in your building. And then I would also ask myself, is what they're doing something so specialized that if the funding amount that they're doing, we couldn't do it better and then maintain control over it? And the answer may be, no, this is a good deal. And it is for certain size libraries, it absolutely is. But proceed with caution, know who you're doing business with, and know that it ultimately falls on you. I'm also going to say it doesn't particularly help the library world narrative, right? Because if the building is just a pass-through for funds, then we're not saying there's something unique about libraries being able to provide these services that then helps us argue at larger levels for funding. When we can do it as a library service as opposed to a pass-through service, it kind of helps everybody. So things to think about. Houses of worship, I don't think you tend to see them do programming directly with you. That's always like kind of a little bit of a squidgy question. But having them work with you, for example, we had a Mormon mission in town that used to have the kids come here to do their volunteer stuff. They were fantastic, but they operated underneath our organization. I've always said, when you're looking for volunteers, start with the churches, the synagogues, the mosques. That's where we get a lot of people from. But you do have to be cautious as far as what sort of ownership a religious organization has over the service that's being provided. The only sort of one advantage they have, and again, I really have to caution at a business level of getting engaged with them, because it's thorny. They may be the nicest people in the world, is there are occasional funding sources that will only fund them, but I don't think to a degree that is really particularly worth the sort of headaches you can get with it. And even it's silly little things, like, for example, we have a church around the corner from us, Crescent Avenue Presbyterian Church. They're wonderful. We love Pastor Lynn. Wonderful people. We had some rooms that had to close for a while. We asked her if we could rent some rooms from them, and we were going to put some tech in and just do a little bit of expansion because nobody was using the building. She said, great. We said, awesome. No real affiliation, just community partner helping us out. Our ESL students did not want to go to a church. They were like, I'm not going to a church for service to receive services. I didn't anticipate it, but it was a thing. So you don't want to sacrifice what makes a library so open to people, which is they feel welcome, by perhaps overly attaching it to something that makes them uncomfortable. And we even talked to like our Mormon missionaries about whether they really needed to wear their name tags during it, because there was stuff. So just proceed with caution. Charitable trusts are interesting. One of the little secrets about private giving is once you exceed a certain dollar amount, you can't apply for that. You're invited for that. Okay. And it's a weirdly secretive world. Frankly, we've had some donations from some very large charitable trusts, but literally I can't tell you about them because that was part of accepting the money. Okay. I don't want to, this isn't like a great story about how we swung that. I was literally out with a buddy of mine, does compliance at a investment firm. And I was out with some of his like finance guys, and I was just like, oh, I forgot how much I said we needed. I was like, oh yeah, I'm just, and these guys are dealing with certain numbers. I'm like, I need like $5,000 for something. And like literally one of the guys just said, yeah, done. Oh, I was like, what? And we get a thing from a charitable trust he was sitting on a board of, and it was all very secretive. We had signed paperwork saying we would never say the name of the trust that we got it from. And then that put us on a list where we were able to then ask them for funds in the future. It's a whole thing. Don't put too much energy in that unless you have somebody who has an in there, is what I would say. Now, if you've got a board member who does that, or you have a patron who happens to have that, great. But otherwise, you'll find that the front pages are pretty much set up to kind of just be like, our season is closed. We'll call you if we want to deal with you. And it really does tend to be like that the board members have a thing that they're interested in, or a thing they hear about that they sort of bring up. So it's really hard to go whale hunting like that unless you have sort of ins and connections. Anyway, next. I'm going to skip this a little bit because I think we sort of broadly talked that there was going to be funding out there for broadband stuff. What I will say, it was really hardened to see was that, one, they were talking about the infrastructure aspect, which is certainly libraries, because we know people come for access to the internet, but also they were talking about the training aspect being important, which is something that I know at the state library level, and I know at other levels, we're trying to really position libraries as the place for frontline digital literacy training, because where else would people go? I mean, not to be that guy, but I always think about, we had this guy, Johnny, who was a roofer, and he'd been a roofer for 30 years. And then he fell off a roof, broke his collarbone, couldn't roof anymore. But now for his 30 years of being a roofer, did he ever have to use a computer? No, absolutely not. Where would that guy go to literally come in at, I don't know how to use a mouse? Where would that guy go? So we're really trying to position ourselves as the outreach for the people who are dealing with absolute zero digital literacy skills. And I think we've seen a big change, that there had been a focus on the shiny digital literacy stuff, like, oh, are you doing Cisco certificates? And it's like, yeah, there's like 0.0000001% of the population is at a place where they could do a Cisco certificate. It may be shiny, it may guarantee you a job doing network administration for $100,000 a year, but unless you've already been working in the field and are highly skilled, this is not a training that it matters for us to offer. We didn't see people paying attention to the absolute basics of it in that way, where it's, again, I would say the North Star. Have we shown everybody how to get an email? Have we shown everybody how to like not get phished? That kind of basic stuff. And there certainly has been a renewed interest in making sure those programs are available. And I think that there's a very clear understanding that public libraries are the best place to do it. So I think that's going to be really cool. Okay, I think we are at the end. If you're watching this, email or enter the following information.